Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Lake. I am one of the co-founders of Bridgit, and I'm so happy that you are joining us today. I think we have a really exciting conversation that hopefully will be really insightful for all of you in terms of Josh and his story at Gray Construction and how they've really been focused on their workforce planning efforts over the past number of years. So, just a quick background on Bridgit. We are a construction software company. We have a product focused on workforce planning specifically for the construction industry. And really, the reason for hosting this webinar is to talk about what does it look like to progress as a construction company throughout your workforce planning efforts. There's lots of different stages in that journey. Not everyone comes into using a product like Bridgit at the same point in time or at the same place as an organization. And so we actually launched what we called a workforce planning maturity quiz a couple weeks ago. We will send you the link so that you can take that quiz on our website. And it really helps to distinguish where you are on this workforce planning journey. Are you starting off in a very reactive state, or are you coming in already with some strategic principles in place and looking to improve that? And so I think Josh's story at Gray is going to be really interesting for all of you to really hear how they've progressed over the last number of years in improving their workforce planning efforts. So, with that, Josh, I will pass it over to you to introduce yourself and Gray Construction.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for this opportunity to come to be a part of this. I think it's pretty exciting. So my name is Josh Murtaugh. I'm Vice President of Operations at Gray Construction. I've been here for 17 years. I had the opportunity to intern starting out here and had the ability to work in the field in our Charlotte office, then ended up back in Lexington here where now I get to work on the operational side of things. So that's a little bit about me, and pass it back to you, Lauren, to get started out.
Amazing. So we're going to dive into some questions. Before I even get started, Josh, do you want to talk a little bit about Gray Construction? What type of work do you do as a
Mhm.
business? And I think one thing to just share with the audience is just the incredible growth that you have seen as a business, particularly over the last number of years. Maybe just walk us through what that growth has looked like. I think that'll be helpful context in terms of some of the workforce planning sort of challenges or opportunities that you saw as you've gone through that growth?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of start off with, Gray Construction. We really focus on the industrial manufacturing world. So we focus on really five markets, and that's food and beverage, distribution, data centers, advanced technology, and I'm missing one advanced data centers, food and beverage, data centers. Do I miss one? Sorry.
It'll come back to you.
Yeah, I'll come back to me. And then, so we focus on really the five markets. And what we did is like years ago, we went to really, we were tracking everything in spreadsheets. And what this did was it siloed our resources into whatever individual group they were in. And there wasn't good visibility across the groups. And then once really COVID hit, really we needed to be able to better, we grew exponentially. And we were still in Excel spreadsheets, still tracking silos. And then we went to another software. And that software we used for a while. We thought it was the right application. It was really cumbersome for our team members to use. People didn't want to use it. So that gave it held with a whole nother group of issues because we weren't getting the right data in there. So we really couldn't resource plan. So then we met with Bridgit, Lauren, and the team, and we really dove into that to figure out how we can have a user-friendly experience where our team members wanted to get to the software, plug the projects we had, made sure the people were in there correctly, and we could see what was happening. So really, as we grew, we had to have at an enterprise level understanding at all times where all our people are, where they're being utilized, what proposals they are on, who is in execution, and when they're going to be done with those. So we all knew at all times if we get this job, this is what it's going to do to us resource wise. If this job extends on the execution side, this is what it does for resource. So we can always look at it and look scenario plan as we have jobs coming in proposal wise and execution jobs that may last longer.
And when you think back to the days of using spreadsheets, I think that's very typical. I'm sure lots of people on the call can relate to that. That's often where we see a lot of companies starting is from a very manual place where workforce planning is happening either through spreadsheets or whiteboards. And every week, a bunch of people are getting together and trying to sift through who's coming available next, what projects do we have, what roles do we need, and how are we matching all of these pieces up. But that, of course, becomes very difficult to do as your team grows and you don't have that level of insight necessarily into each person and their experience and their skill sets and their desires. So, what did that look like for you at Gray, Josh, as you started to grow and hire more people? How were you managing those decisions prior to using software? And how did you know sort of who you were matching up to which project, and how were you making sure that you were building high performing teams, or is that something that you were struggling with and was part of, the reason to start looking at different tools?
Good question. So I would say right now in the current state of the market, and actually back 2 to 3 years ago, we want to what we really want to do is we want to look at, okay, what skill set does this person have and position, and where does that match up with their jobs? And that's kind of what we want to do. Is when we hire somebody to say, okay, it's in this market. They've got that industry experience. We know that we can put them on a project that would make them the most successful. But as we grew too, the biggest problem we had was that we did not have that opportunity to just go pull somebody that had the best experience for that job. So we had to proactively look at, you know, here's the just job coming in. Here are the people that would align to that based on these skill sets we knew. And if they matched up, we could easily put them there. But sometimes that didn't work out exactly. But so that gave us a better understanding too of like, hey, John Doe over here, we know we want him for that, but he's not available till here. Maybe we can plug in this guy and he can carry us to this point. And then at the critical point of that job, we can plug in John Doe over here that we know can really take the project and run lead it through execution. So it lets us plan out a lot better and understand, like, is there opportunity for us to run a job for a while with a certain individual, and then at the critical point, plug in the person that we could use the most at that point. So, but it also tells you, like, hey, we have nobody available that has this experience. Do we need to go hire, or do we need to just go ahead and transfer that person? So it gives you a lot of insight to make critical decisions for the success of the project, but also I'll say for the success of the individual as well, because I think we're all looking at this. We want our team members to grow and not to silo them into a situation. So we can look at opportunities for them to allow them to grow throughout the business and not just in certain groups by having that enterprise understanding.
Absolutely. I know that's been a big focus for you and the team at Gray is making sure that team members have that well-rounded experience, that they're getting exposure to different types of projects, and that you're really understanding where does this person want to focus their career? Is there an opportunity to align the next project to where they want to go and make sure that we, keep that attrition rate low and keep people at Gray and excited and motivated with the work that they're doing. So, yeah, big kudos to you on that because that's very difficult. There's so many moving pieces, but I think really speaks to how you've been able to look ahead and make sure that you're aligning the best teams possible when you're building those project teams. Quick question on once you started. So you talked a little bit about what did that look like when you were using spreadsheets? You decided to start using a software product and really sort of investing more into the workforce planning process. Once you started committing to improving that process, where did you actually start? And what were the first things that you changed? Was it the process? Was it the data? Was it the way the systems that you were using? I know it was a bit of all of those things, but maybe just walk us through what did it actually look like? Who was involved? How did you actually get sort of this initiative off the ground?
Yeah, we knew in order to make it successful, we had to put a major emphasis on Bridgit. And to do that, we assigned a lady named Abby. She was fully responsible for Bridgit and ensuring that it was successful. So we said, okay, you're in charge of Bridgit. You're in charge of making sure the data in Bridgit is correct, because if we don't have good data, it's a useless tool. So she focused on that. You got to make sure we have the correct SOPs in place so that all the teams know the right process to follow. Then ensure that those teams are following that process. The information's in there and it's correct. And then from there, we got to be we had to have the discussion. Okay, how do we want to see it, and what reporting do we want out of it, so the data is useful to the teams, not only to the people at a executional level where we understand where we're moving people, but also at a executive level, so they understand, okay, where are we at with resourcing, so that we can better plan the business around that, to ensure we don't have too many people sitting on the bench, which could create an overhead issue, or not enough where you're not able to train and develop team members so they can grow. So we put a major emphasis on it, and we've got to put those plans together so that it could be successful, and it has to date. And I think our biggest issue, I think we still struggle with for the most part, is making sure that data is accurate at all times. We're working in a very dynamic industry. It's changing every single day. Dates on projects are pushing out. Proposals are coming, going. Due dates are changing all the time. So it's always changing. So the hardest part for us is keeping that data current at all times so that we have the right data. And that's a struggle. And that's why we have somebody there dedicated looking at it all the time. And we're not perfect all the time, but we try the best to make sure we have the right data as much as possible.
Yes, and on the data piece, I know you've really invested in integrating your systems as well. So just for anyone who's on the call, typically what that looks like when we're working with a company like Gray and the workforce planning information is often what are all of the pursuits coming in from a company's CRM so that you can start to scenario plan and say, okay, if we win jobs A, B, and C, then who would be on those projects and what does that look like from a resourcing standpoint? And then also pulling in all of the HR information so that as you're hiring new people, as people are getting promoted, their jobs, their titles are changing, how does that information feed into the system real time? So you're not going in and manually updating that. So I feel like you've done a lot of work on making sure all of those systems are talking to each other and making sense,
Yep.
so that you have that sort of source of truth
Right.
when you're looking at the information.
That's right.
One thing I'd really like to touch on is the actual workforce planning meeting. So we hear from lots of companies that that is often a very challenging, painful meeting where they're trying to pull all of these different people together to make these key resourcing decisions. Oftentimes, to your point, the data in the spreadsheet or on the whiteboard may not be correct. And so there's a lot of time spent trying to sift through all of this. And a lot of people tell us they want to get to the point of having more strategic conversations, but that is easier said than done. I think you've done a really good job of this. From what you've described to me, you're really at the point now where you're able to have more of those debates in the workforce planning meeting and look more holistically at the team overall versus just trying to optimize for one project at a time. Maybe just talk to us about what that workforce planning meeting looks like now versus maybe a few years ago, and what have the main differences been?
Sure. We've tried a lot of different things. We started out, we thought we could do this per market and just join our market meetings and have a quick resource discussion, but we kind of realized there wasn't enough emphasis really on the resourcing piece, which was a major piece, especially in the current market we're in and the need for resources. Then we went to a more of just a bring everybody together, led by more our team members who were over the project ops. Become our project ops group, team members that were really over these team members. And it worked for a while, but weren't getting granular enough because we were having general discussions on here's a project, who's available, and we wouldn't really get into the details enough. And it worked, but it didn't work great. So as we evolved, we kind of changed our structure a little bit. We changed who the team members reported to, and now we came into a operational leadership meeting. and we have a major focus, and we say, okay, here's who's available. And these are the team members out there. And these leaders of these people, they say, okay, they'll have a discussion about every person individually, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, where they best fit, how we can move them to here to help them grow. And um, it's very raw conversation. So everybody understands where the best place we can utilize these team members. And from there, they're moved to wherever they need to be. And it seems to be a much more beneficial meeting than what we previously had. And I think we've been pretty happy with it so far. I feel like it's a benefit for that team member as well, so they're not stuck just not doing anything, and they're having that opportunity to go change a market and put their skills to use.
And has it helped you identify high performing team members that really are on the path to that next promotion and making sure that they get onto the job that's going to make sense for them? And on the flip side, has it helped identify people who may be struggling, who may need more support? How do you think about it in terms of, performance and making sure that you're driving productivity on your teams?
Yeah, I think it does both. We're able to talk about, certain individuals have worked with certain customers, they have certain skill sets. So we're able to have those discussions of like, okay, this individual has this skill set or work this customer. Can we move them over there? And if they can, that's great. We'll work through that. And the flip side too is like, sometimes team members just need hey, really to work through an improvement plan, and we can have those discussions and get them on the right path so that they can be a major contributor within the organization as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know one thing that I think probably surprised some folks at Gray is that it's not just the operations team that is involved in, getting access to this information, in being part of these conversations. It really has spread cross-functionally, where you have operations folks looking at the workforce planning information. You have people from business development, of course, because you're pulling in the pursuits. You have HR, who's part of those conversations from a hiring perspective or from a talent management perspective. Was that the case prior to using software? Is that something you've really, you know, consciously tried to promote, or, how has that evolved in terms of the stakeholders?
Funny you say that. I actually got an email last night asking questions about Bridgit and understanding the data and making sure that we had it right. And this was our business development leader, and he was like, "Hey, look, I saw this. I saw that we got these people available here. I want to make sure that's right. They want to have these discussions because they're planning on what we're going after, and they want to make sure they have the right people sitting out there." So, but yeah, it is something that is everybody is looking at. And the reason that is like, business development is looking at it because they want to understand where the people are at and who's available. And I'll say where we're at too. So they're also using the map within Bridgit too. Okay, I know we got these people in this area. Is there opportunities there in the markets we serve for them to stay closer to home? Also, who's available if they can work hand in hand. And it doesn't always work great. Like sometimes we have somebody lives in California and we got a job in North Carolina, they got to go there because that's the only opportunity. But obviously, I think we're all in the same boat here, where we would like to have people stay as close as we can for a better work-life balance, but it's not always the case. But we do use it. Business development uses it. We also, what we do is we pull the data from Bridgit, so we know as we project out, what we're doing is we pull this data down. So we know we look at the margin per person. So we want to make sure our team members are always making a certain margin per person. So if we know we have somebody that if we look at a job and we know that the margin per person for that overall job is low, we know that there's probably too many people on that job. So we need to think about looking at this job, and we can right size the job. But if we look at the job and we see that it's really high, that could tell us, okay, maybe a good job, or there's not enough people out there and we could have burnout on the job. So we evaluate a lot of the numbers, and we pull this down, we apply the rates to it, and we look at this and we evaluate it, and we can have discussions. you can't just always make a decision right off the data, but like you got to look at it and dive into it, and it allows you to have informed conversations to make those decisions as you plan.
So many great things in what you just said. One thing just to call out, I know you talked about the map and being able to see projects and people and where is it all located. Just for anyone who's not familiar, what Josh is speaking to is the ability to look at where does a person live in terms of their home address and where is the project that they're currently on located and what's that commute distance. I know for Gray, as you said, this has been something really key for your team to look at because you're doing projects across the country and you have people on a lot of travel jobs or with long commute distances. So I know that that's something your leadership team, I think, looks at. You look at when you're planning those project teams because travel does create more risk in a lot of cases or the potential for attrition. It's tough on team members. So I know that's something that you're balancing in those workforce planning decisions. And then the other piece that you spoke to, which I think is really interesting, is around right sizing the teams and having those conversations. Does this team size still make sense given the revenue that this project is bringing in and how many people did we plan on this job originally versus what makes sense now? Were those, I would say, is that data helping you have sort of tougher conversations than maybe otherwise would have happened?
It does. It definitely does because it's it's facts. It's like here's what it is. Here's the margin per person that we have, and we have to have those discussions. Like it makes you have the discussion because the numbers they don't lie. They tell you approximately where you're at, and then you can go sit down and have that discussion. Like, okay, how's the team? Do we have too many people, or do we have enough? And if you have too many people, hey, we have this opportunity over here. I think it'd be better for the team members and also the project too. So it looks at it from a professional standpoint, growth standpoint to be able to put people together, but also the company too to make sure that it's right sized for the project and to be most efficient. And I would say too, just another thing, what we're doing too is that as we look at these people and we're looking at the projections in Bridgit, and we're seeing who's available and who's not. Like we're all mindful of our overhead, so we can quickly tell here's who's available starting in June. Here's what could be the impact to our overhead if they're not put on projects and utilized appropriately. So that's another metric we're looking at too. Is like, okay, if they're not utilized, this is what the impact will be, which can affect your, overall company margin.
And on that, that's a really great segue into one thing I want to talk about. You touched on it a little bit earlier on when you talked about how siloed the information was previously. Each sort of division or region was doing their own workforce planning without really any visibility into the other groups within Gray. And part of you investing in this workforce planning process was to give you better insight and better opportunities to share resources across the divisions. What has that looked like? I think that's something that every company we talk to wants to get to that point, but it is difficult to go from a very siloed approach to a more holistic workforce planning approach. I do think that's something that you've invested a lot into to getting to the point where you're able to look at the information as a company and drill down. Um, I guess just speak to us a little bit about what has that transition looked like? What have the challenges been in moving to a different model?
Yeah, it is challenging. I will not say that's easy by any means, and it's still a major challenge. But the so originally everybody who reported up to a certain leader, they maintained that worked within that group. Now we try to look across and allow to share resources across all our groups, make sure they're fully utilized and really have an opportunity for them to grow too. So as one market's climbing, we will that transition team members there to better support that market to make sure that we're not over hiring or within the company. Now, certain team members, we want to work within certain markets, but also, as most of us are very loyal to our leaders and managers, and they want to stay within that market. And those managers are loyal to those team members, which are good things. Like you want that loyalty to help grow and develop, but like that's where the struggle comes in. It's like it's hard for them to want to go somewhere else when they feel that loyalty here. So that's the struggle. But when there is the opportunity and the right situation, it works very well. But sometimes it is a struggle because it's hard for managers to let them go. But it's also hard for team members to feel that, okay, I'm going to change managers, but they still have my best interest at heart to help me and put me where I want to be long term. So I would say it's a struggle, but we have done it successfully in many, many different situations, and we're going to still be open to it. But also, too, you want to make sure your team member feels like they're in the right trajectory. So, sometimes it's not, even though we see an opportunity, the team member may not want to do it. It may not be the best situation for them or their manager. So, it's got to make case by case and situation by situation.
And when you're making those decisions, is that often in the workforce planning meeting where you're going through the different options and looking at, okay, this market, has high demand. We need more people here. We have some availability within another area. And is that where that conversation
It,
happens?
it can start there. Usually it's a much in-depth conversation and usually falls back out of that meeting into another meeting just because it needs to be, there's a lot of things that have to be discussed. And so I would say it could start there, then it rolls over, or it may just be when it happens, here's the readout and what's going to happen just to make sure everybody's informed about the decision.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, I know we've talked about this in tidbits kind of all over the place, but just to pull it all together, can you just walk us through what does workforce planning look like at Gray today? So you've talked about sort of the progress that you've made over the last couple of years, pulling all of this data together, getting all of the different stakeholders to be part of this process. Maybe just give us a quick overview of what does that look like at Gray, sort of what's the rhythm, how often are you meeting, how often are you updating this information? And then I think that'll just help us pull all of these pieces together.
Sure. So obviously, Bridgit, we pull the data from our HR system for our people who, when they're coming in, the CRM pulls in our projects that we have in there um, to that system, and once that information is housed in Bridgit. Now, when we have a proposal roll in, we have that business unit leaders team. They go in and they put the organizational structure in there, assign the resources needed, and for that proposal, and then once that goes in execution, that obviously flips over to execution. So now you have proposal and execution, and you have all 4 of these markets doing that same thing. So all that feeds into this system. So we have one gentleman, his name's Taylor. Taylor manages the system. So, and what's going on. So he's looking at this every 2 weeks. We make sure we pull a report from that. We look at this report, say, okay, where are we at people wise? Is all the data accurate? And then he's going to all these different teams to make sure this data is accurate, make sure it's right. So that when he pulls this report, we have a good understanding of who's in execution, who's on our high potential jobs, who's just sitting on the bench, and really who's on our other jobs. So we can look at this as a company and we can have this understanding. Now, from that, we also look at, okay, if these people are on the bench, we have this, we call it our operational meeting. We can have that meeting. It happens every 2 weeks to a month. That's when we sit down and we go through, hey, these are the team members who we have available, or here's the team members I need for my market. And we can have these discussions in this meeting and figure out what we do with those teams. They give those team members that opportunity. Then there's one more report we run where we talk about, are these people utilized effectively? And that's where we look at that utilization rate to make sure that we have that margin per head count is matches what we have designated for that job. If not, we'll have another off meeting that says, okay, let's talk about this and figure out, okay, is the job right sized or job not right sized? And sometimes those numbers are a little off depending on the billing, and we just got to have those conversations. So it allows for a really good conversation where you can make decisions on the data as long as it's accurate. And sometimes I think some of you see this, we'll see something and we'll think it's right, and we'll go back and double check it just sure, and it may not be. So we always try to make sure we got that right data. Now that is mainly our operational teams. We also pull in, safety into there. We pull our pre-con team in there so that so we do that too. So when we pull up Bridgit, we know who everybody's on the job. It also one other piece too is when we go to job site visits, we pull it up. We say, okay, when we're going out here, who we're going to see today, and we can go down the list, and we have a good understanding of who all's going to be on this job site when we walk out there. So we're not going in there blindly, and we have a good understanding of what team members are really contributing to that project to make it a success.
That is a great overview, and I think ties in really nicely to the final thing I want to touch on quickly. You already talked about it a little bit, because I'm seeing actually quite a few questions already coming in. So we'll want to leave some time for Q&A, so all of you can ask Josh your questions. But you talked about the data and the reporting that you're doing from this workforce planning
Yep.
information. I think that's one thing that really stands out to me, when I always talk to you and your team at Gray, is how extensive you have made the reporting, and you have benchmarks in place, and you're looking at how does this data compare to last year's information? How is it broken down by project, by region? You've done a really good job being able to quantify what is often very challenging to quantify. Um, I know you're looking at things like attrition rate on projects. You talked about utilization rate. You're looking at the revenue per employee. You're looking at the ratio of tenured team members versus newer or rookie team members, and how does that break down so you make sure you have the right experience on all of these jobs. Was that something, maybe just to give people a little bit of context, how did you actually get those reporting kind of pieces in place? I think it's something that can feel very overwhelming when you're starting from a place of, maybe nothing.
Yeah.
What was the first thing you did to start being more data driven in your approach?
I think the first thing is as we started to grow, we realized that, how do we best support our team members? And our concern was that we didn't have enough tenure on certain jobs. So in order to do that, we started trying to better understand how long have these team members been at Gray. Now, some of these, we got brought in some great technical people, but they just didn't, they're still figuring out our culture. So how can we get the right people around them to support these new team members? So we wanted to understand, all right, what is the tenure across all our jobs? And so that's when we started trying to pull this data in to understand that. So to make sure have supported these newer team members in the right way to make them the most successful. So we were able to look at that 10-year from that perspective to try to, make that put them in the right position. Now, flipping back to that, same thing with attrition. We want to understand, all right, the attrition, but why? Why are we having the attrition? So we want to see that. If we have that turnover, we can dive into that, look at that per job, per market, and understand the reasoning behind that. So we can hopefully go back and figure out those things. So if we have that data flowing in, we understand where it is, and we can hopefully address the issues, the root cause of them, and hopefully fix the issue.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And just looking at, what is the information that you're trying to pull? Where do you start? And then
Yep.
adding to those reports. It's a work in progress. You've been at this
It,
for a while. It's not an overnight, snap your fingers sort of thing.
it's not.
And actually, on the note of sort of data and benchmarking, we at Bridget are actually launching a benchmarking report this week, to take a lot of sort of these similar concepts that you've talked about at Gray and really look at them industry wide so that you can see not only how do projects within Gray compare, but how do you actually compare overall to other companies of your size, and starting to get an idea of what that looks like across the industry. I think that's something we definitely get questions a lot of, how does this compare to my peers? Are we competitive as a business when it comes to these key metrics? So that's
Yep.
something, everyone can stay tuned for. I want to make sure we have time for questions because I see quite a few questions coming in on the chat. Daniel, I'm going to welcome you back to help navigate the Q&A. Please keep posting your questions in here. There's lots of great questions for Josh. So Daniel, I'll pass it over to you, and we'll try to get through as many of these as possible.
Awesome. Well, great conversation so far. I think definitely the questions reflect how engaging this conversation has been. So, yeah, I've just been enjoying it. Let's jump in. The anonymous attendee asks, and this question is for Josh, do you integrate your CRM pipeline into Bridgit?
We pull it in, but we want to make sure that um, not the full pipeline because we don't want it to show a bunch of empty positions out there that we don't need to hire for. So that's a great question. Um, we wanted to pull in most of the data, but we don't want it to pull in projects that are, I would say, let's say, are on the horizon or further out that could dilute the data or make it incorrect.
All right, cool.
And
That
are
makes
you
sense.
doing that, Josh, by like win rate? Once a project hits a certain stage in the CRM, it gets pulled in?
If we're allocating resources or if we're allocating resources to it, that's when it goes in.
Okay. So you're setting essentially a threshold of this is the point in time when the project or the
Yes.
pursuit is real enough that it's going to pull into Bridget, and then we start assigning
Yeah. Our
resources and okay.
our unit leader will then they'll say, all right, I'm putting it in. When they put it in, that's when it's time to go.
Perfect. And just so you know, I'd say companies do this typically in this way, either by um, a certain percentage. So let's say once a project hits
Yeah.
70% probability, it's going to pull into Bridget, or once it hits a certain sort of threshold within the CRM. So that makes sense. And that's a great question.
Yes, that's awesome. I think that actually took care of another question that came in, which was how do you, at what point do you pull a project into Bridget? So I think you two birds with one stone there. So that was great. Um, Next question from Paul. How many people are you currently tracking in Bridget?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a good question. I think we're like I'd say 500 to 600, including that'd be operations, and that's mainly the safety, quality, our procurement group, our pre-con group, scheduling group. So that's the major groups that we really track in there. Really, the teams that are really supporting the jobs.
Cool. And that actually connects to the next question from Ryan. Are you also tracking your craft teams in Bridget, or is it mostly just, the people you were talking about?
No, we're not tracking craft within that right now. We yeah, no, that's we do not track our craft within Bridget right now.
All righty. Um, Lauren, maybe I'll give you a chance to talk about that briefly because I feel like that there might be a little bit more context around kind of some of the craft stuff in Bridget that is worth mentioning.
Yes, just for anyone who's asking about craft, we do have features that also support field teams or craft teams, self-perform teams. And this is something that we at Bridget are investing more and more in to make sure that we're really supporting the needs of sort of that staff, salaried staff, admin staff on projects, and also the craft labor. It's a very similar use case, but often requires a faster workflow. So that is something, if you stay tuned, you'll just see more and more product features coming out from us that really support the craft side. So just for anyone who's interested, you'll see more and more of that over the next few months.
Awesome. Thank you. Mike asks, which reports are you pulling to review every 2 weeks?
So every 2 weeks, we want to see who's on the. We want to see who, what positions, who is in, how many people are in execution, who's available, how many people are on our hypo jobs, who's available, how many people it's on just proposals that we don't consider hypo, who's available, and how many people are sitting on our bench. And then we know whoever's on the bench, we want to know who those people are, so that we can have a discussion to make sure that we are utilizing them. So those numbers, here's why: execution, man, that's perfect. We want all our team members to execute as possible. The hypos, we assume that those jobs will transition over to a project pretty soon, so we don't think they'll be there that long. The proposal and the bench is what we really look at. 'Cause those team members, we want to see, okay, how long are they going to be there, so that we have a good understanding if it's going to be an impact to our overhead and what that looks like.
Awesome. All right. I like this next question from Paul. What is one added feature that you would request from Bridgit?
So I think a lot of what we're asking for is in the works. One is we're going to call it the baseball card. We want to see for our team members, like a lot of times a face with a name helps a lot. It's having that picture within there and their profile sitting in there, and really either a disc or culture index profile with it. So you can go in there and click on that. You can understand who that person is quickly, and it will alleviates a lot of discussions. So really understanding that profile of that person, what their history is, what their current history as your company is, what kind of their profiles, who they are. So just gives you a good understanding of who your team members are, and it just alleviates a lot of additional discussions that can have to happen.
Awesome.
I think a lot of that's already in the works, so of my understanding.
Yes, and I know there's been a lot of talk as well in terms of just how can we support more automation? How can we surface information to you faster so that you can have those productive conversations within your team? So I know that's something that's come up from, other team members at Gray. You're doing lots right now, pulling all of the data together, but how can we continue to support those workflows? So lots of interesting AI things in the works to help support that, and really just make sure that we as a software platform are providing you the right information at the right time so that you can have those debates and make the right decisions.
I would say one other thing too for that, and just on another note, is like if we get to a point to look at it as almost a general conditions budgeting for as labor goes, as you build out your teams, you can understand as you build that out, you understand what that cost metric is. I think, and I don't. This is just something that would be helpful in the future if once we start thinking through it, but. I think there's a lot to think through on that piece of it because I think we're all looking at that at all times as we build general conditions estimates and how they project out over time. If we have that scenario, we could use it because you could use it to look at general conditions, but also look at, okay, this guy's sitting on the bench. This is what's going to be costing me to have all these people sitting out here to quickly look at that. I think that'd be a neat thing we could look at some point in the future.
Awesome. Alrighty. Amber asks, which reporting features, it goes back to kind of reporting we were talking about a second ago, which reporting features are you utilizing to view attrition rate, utilization rate, and revenue per employee?
So it's funny, we pull all that down into spreadsheets. We look at the data, on the Gantt chart view, but then we'll pull it off all that information, and then we start to apply a lot of stuff offline. At this point, I think there is going to be opportunity to do that, hopefully at some point. But right now, we pull a lot of that data of the utilization of the people off of Bridgit, and then we start applying those rates to it.
And just to chime in on that one, so this is something, as you said, Josh, that you're pulling the data out of Bridgit and then comparing it with other data sets and doing your own analysis on it. And lots of our customers are doing something similar. This is a big ticket item for us in the next few months is to build more and more custom reporting features within the product so that you can be doing more of this custom analysis without leaving the actual Bridgit product. So just to chime in there for you, Amber, this is something that there will be more and more robustness, I would say, in terms of those reporting features in the coming months.
Awesome. And I think Ashton's question sort of connects maybe to this. Ashton's asking about a project gross profit field in Bridgit. Do you want to talk to that, speak to that one, Lauren, maybe?
Yes, I think what you're doing, Josh, is you're pulling in the revenue through, your ERP system. Is that correct? And then comparing it to the headcount that you have on the project?
We went through and we figured out what we want all our team members to make per month, per how much margin per team member we want them to make. And then we apply that to that. So we apply that to the job. So once we understand that, we look at the job, how much for the margin they pull in a month to make sure that based on the amount of team members and that margin, what we think as a company they should make our baseline matches or it's too high or too low.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think to answer your question, Ashton, there is not a specific, gross profit field within Bridgit, but we do see a lot of companies pulling together essentially the financial information from other systems and then essentially referencing that with the headcount on the project to understand if they have that correct balance, as you're saying, Josh.
All right, next question. And if you'd rather skip this one, you can, Josh. But someone was asking, which platform were you using before Bridgit?
Um, well, we used spreadsheets, and then I probably shouldn't go into this one. It was a competitor of Bridget, and it just didn't work. It just for us it didn't meet the needs we needed, didn't meet the needs of ours. So we decided to go a different route. And that we never saw them get to that point either. And we had discussions about it. It did not progress as we thought it should.
Good, very diplomatic answer. I like it. All right. Are you good to take a few more, Josh?
Yeah,
They keep coming in. This is great.
absolutely.
All right, next question. When deciding whether the information in Bridget is accurate or not, is this an automated process or something that is done manually? How do you decide if the information is valid or invalid?
Oh, it's very manual right now. So Taylor's meeting with we have Sam's Taylor. Taylor goes and meets with our managers to make sure and has discussions about it to make sure it is correct. So it's a very manual and a lot of discussions happen around this just to make sure it is correct within the system.
All righty. Ben asks, and this may be more of a Lauren question, I'm not sure, but current integrations with Microsoft Project, what does that look like?
We don't like at this point we're not resource loading from Bridget. I
Okay.
assume that's what mainly the question was around.
Yes, I think so.
From a general integrations perspective, just to give the context, when we approached building our product, we knew that being able to integrate with other systems was key because workforce planning lives between all of these other processes within your companies. So, just as a technical note, we can integrate with really any system out there. It's just a matter of how do you want to pull the information together and what makes sense for your workflows. So, can always talk about that more offline, but really anything technically is very feasible and possible. So there are use cases where that would work.
Awesome. Ben's question might be also for you, Lauren. Any future advancements planned for a T&D focused module? I'm guessing talent and development is T&D.
Not a specific module, but lots of I would say new features we're building really quickly and adding to the solution. We're keeping things as flexible as possible so everyone can use the product in a way that makes the most sense for them. So not a specific module, but there will be more product investments made to support more workflows.
Awesome. I think one more probably for you, Lauren. Brandy asks, can you track heavy equipment/resources in Bridgit?
We did not build the product to track equipment. It was not the design or the use case that we originally had in mind. So just calling that out, it's not designed for that. Having said that, there are some very creative people out there who have essentially created their own workflows within Bridgit where you can set up, Josh, you're not doing this at Gray, but essentially instead of adding a person, you could add a piece of equipment or machinery as that profile and then track where is that equipment deployed. So again, just calling it out, that's not how we designed the product, but you can do it. There are companies out there using Bridgit to do that.
Awesome. And I think we have one more question for Josh. Um, I think this question is kind of asking what fields are you using in Bridgit in order to determine who's the right fit for a certain job? Like how are you using Bridgit to determine that?
That's a good question. I don't think we are using Bridget exactly for that yet. To determine that, that is what I think to kind of go back. That's where we use that baseball card. That's where it's going to be. That's where it's very going to be very helpful. It's having that history. A lot of that we got to pull down and figure that out.
Awesome. Well, you made it through the whole list. Thank you, both Josh and Lauren, for tackling all those questions. At this point, I just wanted to give you each the opportunity to maybe leave one final thought, one final takeaway before we hop off. Josh, why don't you go first?
Yeah. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity, Daniel, Lauren. I think just this has been a journey to be on, and I think it's I think resourcing is a very dynamic situation all the times. It changes every day, probably by the minute. From jobs changing, shifting out, coming back, team members coming, team members going. So, and always keeping the information current. So, I think we're all on this journey together. We make lots of mistakes. I'm sure you all do too. But I mean, this Bridgit and this platform's helped us a lot along the way, and I'm very thankful for that. And look forward to that continued relationship and partnership moving forward.
That's great. I love it. Lauren, any last minute words of advice or recommendations you want to leave with everyone here?
Well, first of all, thank you, Josh, so much for taking the time to share your story with the group. I think it's so helpful to hear those tangible examples of how a company has progressed in their investment into something like workforce planning, which, as you said, is very complicated. It involves so many different stakeholders. This is not something that has changed for you overnight. It's been a very diligent effort by you and the team to keep improving this process over the last number of years. Um, I would just want to say, I think this is a great example of how a company can really progress in terms of their workforce planning efforts. Of course, at Bridgit, we want to support that. But Josh, I think your story really shows how many different pieces go into it. And I hope that everyone has something that they can take away within their own business to get to that next stage in their own journey. So thank you so much for joining us all. As I said, you can take the workforce planning maturity quiz on our website. It will actually rank where you fall as a company based on what you're doing today. It'll ask you a series of questions, and then it will give you some recommendations on what to do next based on where you are at currently.